Welcome to everybody on this afternoon's training of the Personnel Development Program Data Collection System. And if you are an OSEP grantee with a PDP training grant, you are on the correct WebEx. I am Bonnie Jones with the Office of Special Ed Programs at the U.S. Department of Education. And as the lead for OSEP on the data collection system, I am pleased to introduce Amy Bitterman, Senior Research Analyst at WestEd, who is also a presenter in today's WebEx. Amy brings a wealth of experience and expertise to the DCS, and we're fortunate to have her doing the presentation today. We encourage you to submit questions in the chat box throughout today's webinar. Questions will be addressed either during the presentation or at the end of the training as time permits. If your question is unique, our contractors will contact you individually after the webinar to follow up. Today's presentation will be archived and available on the PDP DCS website within 2 weeks after today's training, and we'll give you that website afterwards during the WebEx. Let's go to slide 2, the purpose of the presentation. So in general, we want to provide an overview of the data collection system and the steps for submitting your data. Some of you enter this system once a year, so this orientation and review is very important for you. We want to orient you to the web-based data system through a live demonstration, and we want to help assure that grantees submit high-quality data. So today, the training will include a review of some of the program requirements for you to submit data. Amy will be doing an overview and demonstration of the system. Then we'll be talking just a bit about the support available to grantees. And then we'll summarize with the Data Collection System, or DCS, Top 10 list of tips for grantees. We'll close then with questions and discussions. Although I mentioned, please enter your questions in the chat box throughout our discussion, and if we can, we'd love to address them throughout the presentation. Moving to slide 4. The data collection system, or as we call it, DCS, provides many features and efficiencies to help OSEP accurately track scholars from the point of enrollment in your program through completion of your program, and then until the scholar fulfills service obligation requirements. The system is also used for program performance measure reporting under the Government Performance and Results Act and for monitoring the Personnel Development Program training grant. However, a recent audit report of scholar data in the service obligation tracking system directed OSEP to assure that every scholar who receives funds is accounted for in the DCS. This training is part of our efforts to help assure that, and OSEP then requires grantees to submit 100% of your scholar records into the DCS by the deadline for this year of April 4th, 2016. This includes completed and signed pre-scholarship agreements for each scholar enrolled in your program. Scholar records may be in a pending status no more than 30 days. You'll notice that the system allows you to save your data entries. However, you must submit, which is a separate button, your scholar records within 30 days. And you'll be hearing more about that, but those are some basic requirements. Other requirements listed on slide 5 refer to federal regulations. These regulations require grantees submit data for continuation funding and for other reporting such as performance measures, your annual performance report, and service obligations. Failure to submit data or submit data on time can be considered when determining your ability to obtain future grants, not only from OSEP, but from other department programs. Okay, I'm going to discuss very briefly some points, actually key points on slides 6 and 7, which are about the pre-scholarship agreements and exit certifications, which are required under the Federal Service Obligation Regulations. So first of all, starting on slide 6, scholars and grantees must sign and complete a PSA, we'll call that for short, upon officially enrolling in the grant-supported program. So the PSA is uploaded into the DCS within 30 days of the scholar enrollment. You notice that coincides with your being allowed to have 30 days in a pending status. We're trying to keep it all at a 30-day to make it easier for you. Scholars and grantees must sign and complete, then, an exit agreement, or EC, upon the scholar's exit from your program. The EC must be uploaded into the DCS within 30 days of the scholar's exit. Again, using the same timeline of 30 days to make that easier for grantees, and it also complies with our regulations. Grantees may be responsible for repayment of grant funds in cases where they do not have a valid, signed PSA and EC for each scholar. Please use only the required form, which is OMB control number 1820-686. It has an expiration date of 5/31/2017, and that number's in the upper right-hand corner. Both of those forms are available on the DCS website, and we'll give you that information throughout later in this webinar. Let's move into slide 7. All right, you can see here on the very first bullet where that website is, that you can find those agreements. If you scroll down the page, once you get to that website, there's hyperlinks at the bottom, and they'll open into a Word document, and you can download for printing both the PSA and the EC. So when we reviewed the PSAs and the ECs, the grantees have completed and uploaded in the DCS, there are some issues that were revealed, and we want to share some of those issues with you. We've identified agreements that were not signed by the scholar, grantee, or both. They were not dated. We have identified complete blank documents or completed PSAs that were loaded in the system where the exit certification should be loaded. So there were completely blank documents, or they were uploaded in the wrong place. There are 2 documents that are required for uploading, the PSA and the EC. You need to make sure that you're uploading in the correct place. So these quality checks we use when we review the PSAs and ECs. So if any of these issues are noted, what happens is the contractor will contact the grantee to resolve the problem. This may require you to go back to the scholar to correct the problem. You should note that after you enter the scholar's Social Security number into the DCS, Social Security numbers can be redacted on both the PSA and the EC prior to scanning and uploading into the DCS. So let's review some of the quality checks. You have to use the OMB approved forms. The current form, as I mentioned, the ending date is May. It expires May 31st, 2017. Make sure you're using the correct form. We noticed in the fiscal year 2015 new grant awards, some of those grantees included in their application old forms. So it's very important that you're using the form that is current for the time that you're using it. Okay, the PSAs and the ECs must be legible. Our data specialists must be able to read the writing. They must be able to read the dates that you have written. Grantees and scholars must sign these documents. Electronic or printed names are not accepted. They'll be returned to you for a signature. The scholar signatures must be dated, and the scholar names, the Social Security numbers, the program duration, accumulation, academic years of funding, and the total funding received must match what we have in DCS. So it would be helpful if you go to DCS to look at what you've entered under the scholar name to make sure they match. I did mention about the Social Security numbers being redacted, but you need to make sure that the Social Security number is entered into the system before you do that redaction. The entire PSA and EC must be uploaded. We found many have missing pages, so it's the entire document. Don't use your discretion about what you think is important or not. Just upload the entire document. Okay, let's move on to slide 8. Just a few reminders here about service obligations. Scholars in the program who receive grant-funded training are required to complete a service obligation or repay all or part of the cost of such assistance. In addition, scholars must report their employment information into the DCS, and they're responsible for obtaining employment verification. If we're having difficulty contacting the employer with the information the scholar has given us, it is the scholar's responsibility to give us accurate employer information so that their employment can be verified. Scholars who do not fulfill the terms of their service obligation must repay any funds, including the scholarship, interest, and collection costs. So that concludes the initial portion. I want to turn it over to Amy now, who's going to talk about the system itself and the components of the system.
Great. Thank you so much, Bonnie. We did have a few questions come in, so maybe we'll just pause now and address some of those. A couple of questions about the presentation slides being shared and available. As Bonnie mentioned, we will be posting a recording of this webinar on the website, and when we do the demonstration of the website, I can show you exactly where you'll be able to find the recording. We can also put up on the website as well just the slides, if that seems to be what people are interested in seeing. We have a question, does it matter who dates the PSA or the EC? I think you mean, does it matter if it's the scholar or the grantee? Bonnie, do you have thoughts?
I can give you what we would expect, and that is that if I'm signing, I date it myself. I wouldn't expect anyone else to date it. Whoever signs does the date for the scholar. If the grantee signs, then they sign their own, they date their own. We can get further guidance from our Office of General Counsel. We've never had that question before, but that's what we would expect.
Okay. What do we do when a scholar drops out of the program, moves, does not provide forwarding address, and fails to complete an EC? Attempts to obtain the form, including certified mail, do not yield results. What do we do in order to have an EC or something to upload?
Amy, you want to take that one?
Sure. So we have done a lot of work with the grantees in the past, trying to get completed exit certifications, because this does happen. And we at the DCC are definitely willing and able to help try to track down the scholars. We have some tools kind of available to us where we can do some skip tracing to try to, find a better address or contact information for those scholars. Also, if you did, and hopefully you will obtain alternate contact information for your scholars, and that's a person, family member that might be able to help locate the scholars in cases like this. So trying up front to get that information and then using that as you can, just doing Google searches. So I think, contacting the help desk when you run into these issues, and we'll definitely try to brainstorm and work with you to track them down. Anything else you want to add, Bonnie, about?
I think that's the first step, that if that doesn't work, then you work with the help desk to follow through with the next steps, and they will advise you on that.
Okay. Let's see. I'm confused about the difference between DCS and PDP. Employment info goes to DCS, but agreement forms and EC go to PDP. Bonnie, do you want me to?
Right. I think I'm confused a bit about how the terms were used in the question. So I'm going to answer what I think the question is, and then Amy, if you can take your take on it. PDP stands for the Personnel Development Program. That is one of the programs that OSEP operates, manages, and it is a program under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And we fund out of appropriations to that program your grant. We get a certain line item. It's been about $83+ million a year in the past 3 years or so, that out of which your grants are awarded. So put PDP aside. Repeat the rest of the question, Amy.
Employment info goes to DCS, but agreement forms and ECs go to PDP.
Okay. The agreement forms go to the data collection system. We call it the PDP DCS, the data collection system. So the pre-scholarship agreements are uploaded into that system. The exit certifications go into that system. And actually, we automatically contact the employers out of that system as well, and the employer's verification goes back to that system. So it all operates within one system. Amy, did I miss something there?
No, I think what you said is, I mean, the data collection system, DCS, is the system. PDP is not a system, really. That's, I mean, it's the beginning part of the full personnel development. I mean, it's a personnel development program. It's the program overall, but yeah, it's not a separate system.
Okay. If we ever asked that question, if we didn't understand that question well enough, just submit another question and we'll talk about it. Okay?
Yes. We have a few other questions, but I wonder if we should go on and then kind of come back.
Yeah, let's do that. Make sure we have time to do this information.
Yep.
It's all yours, Amy.
Okay. Now we're going to walk through the data collection components and kind of how it all flows and how everything connects. This chart shows how the funding kind of starts out, getting awarded from OSEP to the IHEs. Then U.S. grantees will recruit and select your scholars to participate in the program. Once you've awarded those funds, you will complete the pre-scholarship agreement with your scholar and upload that into the data collection system, as well as the other information that we'll talk about a little later about each scholar. You'll then continue updating the information about the scholar in the system at regular points in time, and we'll kind of go through when you need to be doing that. Then when the scholar exits the program, either through completion or if they exit prior to completion, they may fulfill their obligation either through service or through cash repayment. Scholars who fulfill through service will submit their eligible employment information in the system, and then the employers will verify that information. For scholars who either elect cash repayment or if they're not in compliance, they're referred to the Department of Education's Debt and Payment Management Group for repayment. So to kind of recap that last slide, there's 3 groups of people, users, that we collect data from in the system. First, you, the grantees, will upload your completed and signed pre-scholarship agreements and the exit certifications. You also will enter contact information, demographic, and training information about each of your scholars. Then the second group to enter the system are the scholars. Once you've submitted their records in the system, they'll get an email which will give them access to the system. They'll review the training and service obligation information you entered, and they will also submit eligible employment information. Once they've submitted that information, then the third group, the scholars' employers, will receive an email with a link to review the employment information that the scholar submitted. They will verify that information. It's important to note that scholars will not receive credit towards fulfilling their service obligation unless the employer has verified their employment. And scholars are responsible for obtaining their employer's verification if DCC is unable through the various methods that we have of obtaining verification. Now we're going to go through the different pieces of data that you as grantees will need to be collecting and entering about each of your scholars. You will be putting in the scholar's name, their date of birth, their social security number, also contact information, their address, city, state, zip code, and their email. So email is very important. That's our main mode of communication with you and with the scholars. So we are asking that you put in a non-IHE email so that we can continue to easily contact the scholars once they have left the university. And there's also a place for you to put a second email for scholars that have multiple email addresses. So we ask that you try to collect 2 emails from scholars that have them. Also an alternate contact, which I already mentioned, someone that knows the scholar well, and we would be able to contact them if the information in the system is no longer accurate and we can't get in touch with the scholar. On slide 12, some more information that you as grantees will be collecting and uploading: the signed and completed pre-scholarship agreement. Also information about training prior to entry into the project, including degrees or certificates that the scholar held when they entered the training program and the areas of those degrees or certificates. Also information about employment for the scholar prior to their enrollment, and then information about that employment if they were employed. Their current training information, and that includes the date they enrolled in the program, the degrees that they're pursuing. Then for every fiscal year that the scholar was enrolled in the program, whether or not they were a full or a part-time student at the university, and then the amount of funding they received for every fiscal year. Also, you'll indicate if they were or were not employed during every fiscal year they were enrolled in the program. Then the program completion status, that's an area that, in addition to current training information, that you'll want to keep very up to date. That's whether they're still enrolled in the program or if they've graduated or exited the program prior to completion. So you'll want to change that status when that happens. The service obligation information, that's the program duration, which is really the date that the scholar completed one academic year. Once they do, that's an important date for us to have because scholars cannot submit or have received credit for employment until they have completed that one academic year of training. Also, you'll enter in the number of academic years of training that they've received to date. Also, the completed and signed exit certification, that will be uploaded once the scholar has graduated, completed the program, or exited prior to completion. When a scholar exits the program, you'll put in the date that they exited. And then for scholars who have completed or graduated, you'll put in the degree and the area of the degree that they received. One thing we want to talk about a little bit here, because it's a really important item, it's used for a program measure, is the measure of knowledge or skills that a scholar has taken. We, for every scholar that completes or graduates the program, OSEP expects that the scholar will have taken a measure of skills or knowledge. So we ask the question, have they taken this measure, yes or no, or don't know? There are grantees who are indicating scholars have not taken a measure of skills or knowledge, or they don't know if they have. So please just make sure that you are obtaining complete information from your scholars about this, and you're making sure to keep track and get that information. Also, comprehensive exams, portfolios, practicums, defensive dissertation, supervisor evaluations, these are all considered acceptable grantee-specific measures. There are grantees who are continuing to report measures that should not be included, and we're really looking for a measure that's taken at the end of the scholar's experience in your program. So things like entrance and preliminary exams or individual course exams or grades, those are not cumulative enough and should not be reported or counted for this measure. We want to remind you also about your ongoing reporting in the system. As Bonnie mentioned, you should be entering scholars into the system within 30 days of when they enroll in the program. You should not leave scholars in a pending status for more than 30 days. And when we do the demonstration of the system, you can see kind of what that means to be in a pending status versus a submitted status. Let's see. Also, grantees must update your scholars' information within 30 days of a change in their status. So if they exit the program, complete the program, within 30 days of that happening, you should be going into the system and changing their status and updating all the other relevant information. The system is available all year round, so you should really be going in at least a couple times a year. But in the spring of every year, as we did last week, a notification will go out to all the grantees, just letting you know by a certain date, and this year it's April 4th, you must have all of your data for the scholars who were active in the last fiscal year. So during fiscal year 14 is the last fiscal year. All of that has to be entered and submitted and up to date by April 4th. So DCC we do have the capability, and we do kind of keep track of how often grantees are logging in, and grantees who do not get their data entered and submitted by the deadline will be referred to OSEP, and your project officer will contact you to discuss why you have not submitted all of your scholar data. We also want to talk a little bit about the scholars reporting. There's a few measures that OSEP reports on annually that are based on employment data that scholars report and have verified. And this data has suffered over the last few years because scholars are not logging into the system, and they're also not submitting employment data. So because you have contact with your scholars and you see them at least while they're in your program, we really emphasize the need for you to remind them when they enroll in the program, throughout the program, and especially at the end of the program, to please log into the system as soon as they have access to it, to be verifying updating their contact information, and then entering their employment information once they've completed that one academic year, so that we have complete and high quality data for the performance measures. And it's also really to the benefit of the scholar that they go in as soon as possible and put in their employment, because they have to fulfill their service obligation by a certain date. And if scholars do not have verified employment submitted by that date that they have to have it fulfilled, they're not in compliance, and they will be referred to the Debt and Payment Management Group for repayment. We do have a number of resources that are available to scholars that we encourage you to take a look at and to please ask your scholars to review on the training and resources page of the data collection system, and I'll show you that page when we do the demonstration. There's a link to a scholar training, and that goes through the service obligations requirements and also describe the employment verification process. And there's also a quick reference guide that kind of gives a step-by-step layout of how scholars will create their accounts in the data collection system, and also how they submit their employment information for verification. Scholars should be logging into the system needs to log in within 30 days of getting access, and then again at least every 6 months until they fulfill their service obligations. So we really are hopeful that you can remind them as much as you can, since you do see them and know them, and we really don't. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Bonnie to talk about how the data.
Thank you, Amy. This will just be a quick summary of how OSEP uses the data that you report, just so you know how important your data is to us. And the data I'm going to be talking about will, of course, be the data that you submit into the data collection system, or DCS. It actually allows OSEP to collect, analyze, and report data for program improvement activities and to be able to monitor grant performance. So we're looking at your scholars that you've enrolled, how long is it taking for them to complete the program, and exit from the program and enter into employment. It also helps us assure accountability for all scholars. We're required, as I mentioned earlier, that we must have accountability for all scholars that we fund in our grant program. So by grantees submitting scholar enrollment training and completion data as specified in the priority and in their application, that helps us assure accountability. Also, scholars are, it ensures that the scholars are meeting their service obligation requirements. And finally, we use this data in the aggregate form to report our program performance measures as required under the Government Performance and Results Act to budget, and then it is eventually reported to Congress on an annual basis. So in a nutshell, that's how we at OSEP use the data that you report into the data collection system. And then let's move to slide 17. So as we see it, this investment from OSEP's side of the contract for the data collection system has a lot of benefits for us, in addition to us having data that we need to use for these important, to address these important federal regulations under GEPRA and the service obligation regulations. We're able to monitor the system, the grantee performance, and also the service obligation of all scholars in the system, where the system is available to you year-round, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and I mean that literally because I keep metrics on how often the system is down per quarter, and is down very infrequently, less than 2 hours per quarter. So it truly is available to you. And finally, our scholars, you have real-time access to the training that we do by the archive training that is on the web. So if you or one of your colleagues or someone that's working on your grant are not able to be on this webinar, you will within 2 weeks be able to access the training on the website, the DCS website. You also have real-time access to your scholars' information. It is, with that, we'll move to slide 18. Furthermore, we feel this investment of the contract is a huge support for you as a grantee. For example, reporting of this webinar itself, it will be on the data collection website I mentioned. The website houses a number of resources, including frequently asked questions. The frequently asked questions are those that we've received from institutions of higher ed, from scholars and employers regarding program regulations and requirements pertaining to the grant funding on the website. And finally, there's a trained help desk staff of service obligation experts who are available Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Eastern Time. And please note the 800 number is also on the website, 1-800-285-6276. And also, you can contact those same service obligation experts and help desk experts at serviceobligation@ed.gov. They try as hard as they can to do a 24-hour turnaround, and that happens most of the years, but there are periods of time, especially during the data collection period, when the volume of requests is quite high, so it might take a bit more than 24 hours Monday through Friday during that period of time. Okay, Amy, are there questions that we can address before we move on to the next slide and the demonstration?
Yes, there are quite a few questions, so maybe we should take a few more now. What about scholars who exit the program before this new system was set in place? Are we still required to obtain an EC?
The exit certification has always been a part of the 2006 service obligation regulations under which we are operating. So it is in regulation. We have no flexibility about that. It's very clearly stated that it's a responsibility to have an exit certification. If you contact the help desk regarding specifics on what your particular issue is, they might be able to help you walk through how you can address your issue.
Okay.
Amy, is there anything you wanted to add to that, or do we need to move on to another question? Okay.
No, that's fine. For the EC, do we need to upload all the Federal Register instructions as well, or just the 5 pages of information?
Just the 5 pages of information.
Yes. Okay.
It's the total document. I believe it's 5 pages, maybe 8 pages, I'm not sure. It's whatever you download in the Word document. That's the total package.
After a scholar exits a program, is the grantee still responsible for following up to make sure the scholar continues to update employment information?
Oh, that's a good question. That would be wonderful if a grantee would do that. For purposes of our program, our regulations don't require that. I understand in the HEA there are requirements of following up with scholars after graduation, but this is an IDEA-funded grant, and we have assigned the contractor to be the scholar contact for that. There's significant ramifications if the scholar does not follow up because they're responsible for their service obligation debt. And if they don't follow up, then they may owe significant debt. There could be a situation where the help desk contacts the grantee for any assistance if they've not heard from the scholar. So this points to the grantee's responsibility, and that was also mentioned in our audit report. The grantees have a significant responsibility in orienting the scholar to their responsibilities once they complete the program. And I believe, Amy, you had a link earlier on the scholar slide that was sort of a cheat sheet for scholars that you can use in your orientation with scholars about their obligations after they graduate.
Okay. Do scholars need to submit employment information for jobs they may hold while in the training program, for example, if they are working for a school district?
After they are in training for 1 year, and if the employment is eligible under the federal service obligation requirements, they may begin entering their employment data, and it may be used towards service obligations. There are some really great frequently asked questions and responses about that, but I think that's a good answer in a nutshell.
If there are any changes in scholars' information in the middle of an academic year, do we change whenever the changes happen in the DCS? And I would say yes, please, if you can, definitely make those changes at any time. You don't have to wait until the academic year is over or until we send out that notification telling you, please have everything updated by a certain date. Please, go in frequently whenever there are changes and update them.
I think that's a great point. I think it's worthy of mentioning that is at 86.9% at the end of the year of this data collection, you've already submitted. Your 86.9% of grantees already submitted 100% of their scholar data for this collection period. So that's pretty remarkable. It means that you're paying close attention. So it means that there's about 40-some grants or so that didn't, and that was a little over a month ago. So we'll be tracking that data very closely at OSEP so that we can provide good assistance to those grantees who need to yet finish their data submission so that all scholars are submitted in their program, and many of you may have updates that you'd asked about that will need to be done during this period.
Okay, why don't we take maybe one more question now and then move on? How would the work obligation be managed if a student decides to continue their education and get a PhD?
Oh, that's a wonderful question, and there is a frequently asked question about that provides really good detail, and the answer is yes, there's a process though. It's called a deferral, and it is a process. It's a flexibility that's allowed for in the Federal Service Obligation Regulations. We are bound to follow those federal regulations, so we're really pleased to say there is that flexibility for it, but you need to follow the steps and guide your scholar in what they need to do because it involves them requesting a deferral and providing certain information. So have them research the frequently asked questions, then get in contact with the help desk right away so they can do this request for a deferral in a very timely manner.
Okay, why don't we turn now to the demonstration of the system. We're going to go through logging into the system, how you add a secondary user, updating contact information, and also entering and submitting data for a scholar. So I'm just going to switch over now. And Heidi, can you just give me confirmation that you see the website?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Here is our website. The actual URL is pdp.ed.gov/OSEP. I'm showing you this on a demonstration site, but everything is exactly the same as it is on the live website. You'll see on the left-hand side, we have links to some pages that you may want to access, your scholars may want to access with a lot of additional information, and that's available to anyone, even if they don't have a login to the system. I'll just go through a few of these that are really important ones that we've already talked about. The training and resources page, I'll click on that, and that shows you at the top the scholar training and resources, links to those, the ones that we talked about, and then also grantee training and resources, and we have links to previous trainings, and this is where you'll see the link to this training that we're doing today. The recording of that will be on this page. Then the pre-scholarship agreements and exit certifications. This is the page Bonnie mentioned. If you scroll down to the bottom of the page, there are links for you to download the only version of the agreements that you should be using of the pre-scholarship and exit certifications. Also, there are links here to the regulations, a link to OSEP's page. Our contact information for the help desk is also here on the left-hand side. There's also another page that includes that information as well. So to log in, there's a couple different places where you can log in from. It says secure login down on the left-hand side and also in the right-hand corner. For those of you who are brand new project directors, have never been into the system, you'll be receiving an email from us in the next day or so that will have instructions for how you log into the system the first time, create your account, and create your password. For those of you who have already logged into the system and have your password, you will always log in using your email and the password that you created. If you can't remember your password, you'll click on this Forget Password link. You'll enter your email, click on Reset Password, and you'll receive an email with instructions for how to reset your password. So I'm going to go ahead and log in. And every time you log in, you're going to see a message that's reminding you of your responsibilities for entering timely and accurate data, and also reminding you of your scholar's obligation requirements. So you'll click I agree to the terms, and then you'll be taken to your main landing home page. At the very top of the page is just some basic information with your grant number, your name is the project director. If you have a secondary user, they're listed here, and the start and the end date of your grant. And then down below that, you have grant personnel, which again lists you as the project director, the secondary user if there is one. And from here, if you need to change any of your contact information, your phone number or your email, you would just click on your name and it takes you to this edit page. And you would then just click save. And you can also make edits to your secondary user's contact information as the project director. If you want to add additional personnel, if you want to add a secondary user or change the secondary user, you can either do it from here where you would click on add personnel, or you would do it by clicking on the grant number on the top. And here it says select the secondary user for this grant. And if you click here to add more personnel, you would get to that same page. And then once you have added that new personnel, if you go to the drop-down, you'll see their name listed, and then you would pick who you want to assign to be the secondary user. On this page, you'll also see your start and your end date, and then phone number and contact information for the grant. And then you would click Edit Grant to save any changes. So if I scroll down the page, here's your scholar information section. And there's some little reports down kind of in the middle of the page that are really useful for you to see kind of a bird's eye view of your record entry status. So how many scholars do you have in the system? How many of those are submitted records? How many are pending? Counts by program completion status, and also the service obligation status. And that takes into account if scholars have logged into the system and if they have begun fulfilling their service obligation, and even if they've completed and fulfilled their service obligation. And then at the very bottom is where you would indicate kind of where you are in your data entry process. If you've entered scholars but have additional scholars that you'll be funding later on, or if you have entered data and submitted all scholars that you will ever be putting in the system. So if you click on View All Scholar Records, at the top of the page, it just goes through and gives definitions for all of the statuses that we saw on the previous page. At the very bottom is a list of all of the scholar records you've entered, their names, and then it tells you what their entry, program completion, and service obligation status is. This service obligation status is really important, and as Bonnie mentioned, you should be using it as a way to kind of keep track of your scholars if they have logged into the system. So if you see awaiting login as the service obligation status for a scholar, we ask that you follow up with that scholar and say, I noticed you hadn't logged into the DCS yet. It's really important that you log in as soon as possible. Are you having problems? And then please, have them contact us if they are having any issues getting in. Also, as you can see in this example, all of these scholars have fulfillment not in progress, so they have not, they do not have any verified employment in the system yet. So again, with scholars like that, you might want to check in and just say, I noticed you have no, verified employment yet, but I know that you do have employment and you've completed the one academic year, so, please go ahead and enter your employment in the system. So to add a new scholar record, you would click on the Add New Scholar Record. And then the first thing that you do is enter their social security number. And that's because the system checks to see if the scholar is already in the system. If there are some scholars that have received funding from multiple grants, we want to just have the scholar in the system once and be able to connect all the grants to that scholar so that we can accurately be tracking their service obligation and they're getting credit as they should be. At the top, please make sure you read the information. There's some instructions there. One thing to keep in mind about the system timing out, you will get kicked out of the system after 30 minutes, and the information you've entered will not be saved unless you have at the bottom either submitted the record or saved it for later. So if you're getting close to that 30 minutes, and you should get a message about 5 minutes before the 30 minutes is up that you need to make sure you save your data, please just be saving it. You can save the record and then go back into it and continue, but you don't want to lose what you've entered. The top section is the name, Social Security number that you already entered, the scholar's email. Here's where you would put in their second alternate email address if they have a second email. Then section B is their contact information. All of the red asterisked items are required for you to submit the record. If you're just saving the record and it's going to be in a pending status, which again can only be for 30 days, you just have to enter their name, Social Security number, and email in order to save it for later. To submit the record, all the red asterisked items have to be completed. And you will get messages. If you try to submit it, you'll have a message saying address is not complete. That must be complete in order to submit the record. Section C is the contact information for someone who, a relative or someone that knows and would hopefully know, if we have trouble locating the scholar based on the contact information in the system, how to get in touch with them. Section D is where you will upload the pre-scholarship agreement. You would click on Choose File and then just go to the place where you have it saved. Section E is demographic information, their gender, race, ethnicity, age, disability. Section F is information about the scholar's training and employment prior to their enrollment in the program, the degree, area of their degree. If they were employed prior, then you'll get some additional questions about that employment. Section G is about their current program, the date they were enrolled, the degree that they're pursuing, the age of the children that they're being trained to work with. You'll need to select one special education and or one related services training area. That's the focus. But then you also, in item 4B, can select up to 3 additional training areas. Section G, at the bottom here, items 5 and 6, these are 2 of the items that you will need to complete for the scholars every year they were enrolled in the program, every fiscal year. So what you need to have completed by April 4th is the information for fiscal year 2014. If you have, since fiscal year, we are now in fiscal year 15, and if you have some of that information already, please by all means you can enter that. But what must be done is 2014 and prior should have already been completed. So whether or not whether they were a full-time or part-time scholar in the fiscal year, the amount of funding they received in the fiscal year must be completed. And then in Section H, we ask if they were employed during the fiscal year. And if you say yes, then there are some additional questions about their employment. I just want to say a little bit about the fiscal years because there is confusion every year with what that means. And that corresponds to your own grant's budget period. So that's going to vary from grant to grant. And it depends on when your grant was awarded, what day. Some grants, if you began, let's say, September 1st of a particular year, then your fiscal year 14 would have run from September 1st, 2014 through August 31st, 2015. So that's the period of time we're talking about for fiscal year 2014 for you. Another example, a lot of grants started January 1st of a certain year, doesn't matter really which year, but for the group of you, your fiscal year 14 will be January 1, 2015 through December 31, 2015. So this fiscal year does not necessarily correspond exactly to your academic year. If you have any questions about your fiscal year, please contact the help desk. In the notification that we sent out to you last week, we do have in there the start and end dates of your own grants fiscal year 14. So please refer to that if you're not sure. I can also show you back on that home page where you have your start and end dates, and you can use those to figure out the dates for your fiscal year. Section I is the scholar status. This is a very important section also that you'll be updating pretty frequently with their program completion status, if they're enrolled, exited prior to completion, or if they completed the program duration, and that's that item about if they've completed one academic year, and then the date they completed the academic year. The accumulated academic years of funding, and then that then gets calculated by the system for your total service obligation in months that the scholar will owe. Then once scholars have completed the program, there'll be some additional questions in Section J that must be completed: the degree they received, the focus of their degree. You can select up to 3 additional training areas. And then here's that very important question we talked about, the exam or measure of skill to demonstrate skills or knowledge. Everyone really should be saying yes, that they did take an exam, the scholar did take an exam of skills or knowledge. Then you'll select the type of measure of skills or knowledge. If it's a grantee-specific test, such as a comprehensive exam or a defensive dissertation, that's what you'll select, and then you'll get a second drop down to pick that specific exam that they took, whether or not they passed that. And again, you should know whether or not they passed. And then you can report information for up to 5 measures of skills or knowledge, but we only require 1. And then in Section K, you will upload the completed and signed exit certification, just like you did above for the pre-scholarship agreement. And then at the very bottom, you will just check off that you are attesting all the information you entered is true and correct to the best of your knowledge. And then here's where you will either save the record for later, and that puts it in a pending status, or you will save it and submit it. So please, everything should be saved and submitted. Should not be any longer than 30 days that it's in a pending status. Scholars will not be able to access the system until the record has been submitted, and also submitting the record is an indication to us at the Data Collection Center and also for OSEP to know, okay, this record is complete. It's up to date as of this moment in time, and we know that data should be accurate. So I'm just going to kind of quickly go back here. I'll show you at the top here is where you see, again, your start and end dates. So if you need to figure out your fiscal year, in this example, this grant was awarded 12/6/2011. So the start of their fiscal year would be 12/6/2014 of their fiscal year 14. Going back to the View All Scholars, I just wanted to show you if you need to go back, when you go back into your scholars after you've submitted their records and you need to update their information, here's a scholar that is still enrolled in the program. So if we click on that scholar, we're taken to the record and we can go ahead and make any edits that we need. And you'll want to enter in, I know this is probably making people a little nauseous seeing this go by quickly. You know, you would put in your information for fiscal 14 and do all the updates that you need to at that time, and then you can go ahead and save and submit that record with the updates. Now, for records that are scholars that have graduated or completed or exited prior to completion, those records you will not be able to edit. Once you have submitted them and they've graduated, in theory, all that information should be correct and complete. If you do need to make any changes to those records, though, please contact the help desk and we can make those changes for you. So I know that's a very quick and brief overview of the system, but please contact the help desk and we're happy to walk through any of it with you again and answer any questions. I'm going to now turn back to the PowerPoint. And maybe it will stop again because there are, it looks like, some more questions that have come in. So, does alternate address need to be someone not in their household and a family member? I think it's kind of, up to the scholar. It's not necessarily. I mean, if that's who they want to put down and that person has a different email than they do, just a different way of possibly reaching the scholar. That would be helpful. It might make the most sense for it not to be someone in their household, because they would obviously have a different phone number and different address, and it's just kind of a different way for us to reach them. But it's, whatever the scholar is comfortable providing. So this data collection is for fiscal year 14, and that's correct. That was the previous fiscal year. Please make sure everything is up to date, all the contact information, and if you do have information you want to put in those rows for fiscal year 15 already, please go ahead and do so. We have a suggestion. This is a really great one, to have a webinar like this for scholars to help them better understand the service obligation and to collaborate. And I think that's something we've definitely talked about and do plan on doing. So if we brought in new scholars in 2015, we don't need to do anything just yet. Is that right? Not exactly. So scholars, as we said, they do need to be in the system within 30 days of them being enrolled in the system. So kind of separately from the fiscal year 14 data collection, anytime you enroll a new scholar in the program, at any point in time within 30 days of that, you should be putting their information in the system, uploading their pre-scholarship agreements. In the case of an error, is it possible to access a submitted document for edit? Definitely. For scholars that are still enrolled in the program, yes, they are. You can go in at any time, and we want you to continue going in and updating their information. Once they have graduated or exited prior to completion, and you do need to make changes, like I said, please contact the help desk, and we can get those changes made for you. For doctoral training programs, does the IHE need to report the scholar's employment status as a graduate assistant while enrolled in the program? Bonnie, are you there?
Yeah. Can you hear me okay, Amy?
Yes.
Okay. I think the first point would be to make sure that that employment is eligible employment for service obligation. And if that's what the question is about, whether that employment is eligible, we need to go through a series of questions about that. So it would be important that you work with the help desk to determine that. But there are too many variables to be able to answer that in a broad way.
Okay. Okay, I think that's, I don't see anything else right now. So now we are going to go through the top 10 things that we think you need to know about DCS. So number 10 is just about secondary users, and that we think that it's really helpful to have a second person to help, especially if you have a lot of scholars. Just doing that data entry, can be time consuming. So by all means, please add a secondary user in that you trust and is part of the program that can help you with that. It really is ultimately the project director who is responsible, so just make sure you keep that in mind. Also, the secondary user needs to have their own unique login. You should not be sharing logins among each other. When I showed you how you enter how you get add the secondary user to the system, and when that happens, an email is automatically sent to the secondary user with instructions for logging in, and then they will log in using their email and the password that they created. Like most systems, we have it's a high level of security that we have to maintain because we have personally identifiable information in the system. So in addition to all the other security pieces that we have to make sure are in place, passwords are very important. It will, we have very strict rules for how to create your password. You cannot reuse passwords. If you enter your password incorrectly 3 times, you will be locked out of the system for an hour, and then you will not have to reset your password. You will be able to get back into the system after that hour. And please, like I said, don't share passwords. Email is our main mode of communication with all of the users of the system, with you, with scholars. So please just be on the lookout for emails that come from serviceobligation@ed.gov. Add us to your safe contact list so we're not going into your spam and your junk mail, but also be checking there in case we do end up there. And please make sure to let your scholars know to do the same so that they don't miss our emails. I already discussed how it would be great if we could have 2 emails from all the scholars. In particular, really having a non-IH email from a personal account they use or their work email is really critical, because we are going to be reaching out and needing to maintain contact with the scholars for years after they've left the program, and university accounts often close or scholars stop checking them, so we need those other types of emails. We've described how to access the system. The brand new project directors will be getting an email with instructions and a link to access the system and create your password. If you've forgotten your password, click on the Forget Password link, and you'll be able to reset your password. I think that's about it on that one. Also, we've talked about this, but again, we just really want to reiterate the importance of you please helping us by reminding your scholars to log in every 6 months at least to just check, make sure they're updating. They can update their own contact. You enter their contact information initially, but they have the capability to make changes to it. So please, they should be checking that. Also, I showed you how you can kind of keep track of your scholar's service obligation status, so you can follow up with them if they aren't logging in or aren't entering or having their employment verified. And this is all so critical to us for the program performance measures, and also for the scholars to fulfill their service obligation and not be referred for repayment. A few more reminders just to make sure that we are obtaining the highest quality data. Please let your scholars know at the beginning of the program that they will need to be providing you with information about a measure of skills or knowledge, a licensure test, for example, those results. They will need to be telling you that information so that you can report it through the DCS. Also, one strategy we recommend that we know a number of grants do is you schedule an exit interview with your scholars at the end of the program where you can sit down, they can give you that information you need, and you can also complete and sign your exit agreement at that point. Also, just by April 4th, going in the system, those important items that you have to complete for every fiscal year in sections G and H, please get those updated, as well as updating the scholar contact information and their service obligation and training information. We've talked about this, the times at the points when you need to be updating the system. Within 30 days of a scholar enrolling in the program, please enter them in the system. They shouldn't be in a pending status for more than 30 days, and then you're updating the scholars if there's a change in status. Also, at the end of the grants project year, really you should be doing it at the end of every academic year when new funding is being given to them for that next academic year. So really, every 6 months is kind of what we expect. We've talked a lot about the the completed and signed pre-scholarship agreements and exit certifications. Just be aware that grantees may be responsible for funds that are provided to scholars when you don't have these documents. So just keep that in mind, of course. And to make sure you're using the correct forms, please go on to our website and make sure you download and have the right forms with the 2017 expiration in the right-hand corner. And then most importantly, at least right now, is that all of your data are updated and submitted for all of your scholars by April 4th. No scholar should be in a pending status on April 4th. According to the regulations, grantees that don't submit scholar data in a timely fashion, that could be used in determining your project's ability to obtain future grants, both from the department, from OSEP and from other department programs as well. And again, here is contact information for the help desk. So please reach out to us, and we are happy to sit with you and go through any questions you have and hopefully help get all this data submitted by April 4th.
Okay, we do have a little time for more question and answers. Amy, are there questions that we can address right now before we close?
There's a few more. Do you need to upload scholar data to the system if they have not begun to receive funding under the grant? Do you want to take that, Bonnie, or you want me to?
We use the guidance when the scholars enrolled in the program. So OSEP gave you funding for a program, and the marker that you use for enrollment in your program, are they attending the courses in the program? That's what marks it. And most people align funding with enrollment in the program. So if there is any nuance you're using in your program, you probably need to contact the help desk to see what that variation might involve.
And here's kind of a similar question. If the scholar's in the program but not receiving grant funding, do we create a scholar record?
You receive a scholar record for every scholar in your program. There may be a semester where that scholar doesn't receive funding for some reason. There's a mechanism in the DCS where you can report no funding. But if there's no funding every year, then I guess we have a question about there would be no service obligation because there wouldn't be no funds to repay. So we wouldn't consider that scholar in your program if they've never received funds.
Okay. If we wrote PSAs for 1-year awards and a scholar takes a second year to finish the program, do we need to complete a new PSA for year 2?
I guess you need to take a look at the PSA to see what it says. You can be safe by having them sign another one for that second year, but if your initial PSA was flexible enough with dates, then you might be okay. Again, you may want to be on the safe side and contact the help desk to have them take a look at what you had in mind as to why it wouldn't. Typically, from date of entry to date of exit is when the PSA is in effect, and then at exit is when the exit certification needs to be signed.
Is there a way to see scholar entries of employment verification? And unfortunately, there isn't for grantees. That information is only accessed and viewable by your scholars. But you could, obviously, if you want to try to assist your scholars, if they're having trouble, by all means, talk to them. And if they, are willing to share the information with you, that's, maybe another way to help them make sure the information is getting verified. Anything else to add, Bonnie?
No, I will add a bit to the question about the resident assistant. There is one piece that I can provide guidance on regardless of what the job description is and if that particular employment does meet eligibility. If it's funded out of the grant, those federal funds, it is not eligible. Okay.
Let's see. If we admit someone after April 4th, can they still be entered? So yes, and they should be entered. The system is available 24 hours a day, year-round. So definitely, even if, I'm assuming this scholar would not have been active in fiscal year 14, so that's fine that they wouldn't be in there by April 4th. And if you're just enrolling them on April 4th, you do have, that couple-week period to get them in. So yes, please put them in, as soon as you can after April 4th to make sure you meet that 30-day deadline. Is everything due even if the new project directors have not yet received their sign-in instructions? And I'm sorry, I should have said this sooner. For the fiscal year 2015 grants, because you weren't active during fiscal year 2014, you do not have to have your data in by April 4th for scholars that were enrolled in fiscal year 14 because you didn't have any. But we did want to have you participate in this training because it's just a good introduction to the system and kind of lets you know what we expect and gives you just that introductory information. So please, put your scholars in within the 30 days of when they're enrolled. But no, we obviously, your data will not be included in that fiscal year 14 bunch for data collection purposes. If a scholar has received funding and is taken off for 1 or 2 semesters, we just report not enrolled until they return. I guess that might be one you want to contact the help desk about because it gets, it kind of depends if are they still technically enrolled at the university, but they're not receiving funding for those couple semesters from the grant. We do have that option of, they're still enrolled but no longer receiving funding. And then you could switch them back to just being enrolled once they do return and receive funding. But if they if it's unclear if they're going to be returning, you should really probably make them exited prior to completion. But again, this is, one that I think we probably would take on a case-by-case basis, and you want to contact the help desk. My administrative assistant works on another OSEP personnel prep grant, so when I attempt to load her in as a personnel on the DCS, it indicates the user exists in the system and won't let me add her. Please contact the help desk, and we'll get that taken care of. There's no space on the scholar form to include a phone number. If you can kind of clarify, I'm not sure which, I don't know if you mean the PSA or the EC or in the system itself, because there definitely is a phone number field in the system. So if you can just clarify where you're talking about. What about a new group of folks enrolling in the near future for fall 2016? So again, those, once you have your pre-scholarship agreement signed and completed and they're officially enrolled in the program, then you would put them in the system. What happens during pregnancy if a scholar takes a year off? Again, I think you would need to, that's a tricky one, because
They need to, go ahead.
No, please.
I think for these individual circumstances like that, that's a really good question. And a lot of it depends on how that status is with the university, and Amy talked about that earlier. If there's a status that keeps them enrolled at the university, we're not sure what takes a year off means. So if you would contact the help desk, and they can provide better guidance for you specifically about that, and they can answer your questions on what that part about takes a year off looks like. What are your institutional rules for that? So those are the specifics they would be able to help you better with.
So there was some clarification that the PSA doesn't have space for a phone number. And that's fine. You don't, if it's not on the PSA, you don't need to put it on there. But we do need the scholar's phone number in the data collection system. How do we document part-time students? For example, if a student is part-time for 2 terms, do we enter them into DCS with their part-time credits or combine credits into 1 term as full-time? And this is where I would definitely direct you to the FAQs. We do have FAQs about the figuring out your accumulated academic years of funding, because it's really based on how your university counts an academic year, and we do get into part-time with that. So please take a look at that, and if you still have additional questions, we can talk to you individually. There might be one more. We have 2 new grants in the 2nd term now, but the new project directors have not yet received the email with instructions for logging in. Do they have to enter all the data they have so far, uploaded forms, and submit by April 4th? So I think you're referring, I believe, to fiscal year 2015 grants. So those would have been grants that were awarded in fiscal year 2015. And for you, we will give you a little, you haven't gotten into the system yet, so April 4th does give you, a couple months, so we would hope that by then you will have put in all of your fiscal year 2015 scholars and entered their information. You will be getting those welcome emails in the next day or so, but please, contact us if you feel like you need some more time or are having trouble. Okay, I don't see anything else. If I missed your question, please contact the help desk and we'll be happy to answer it.
Okay, well, with that, Amy, I want to thank you for your role in today's webinar, and to thank all of our grantees for taking the time today, and be sure to watch for this archived training within the next 2 weeks on the pdp.ed.gov website. And please have everyone who is entering data review this training. It's a required training for everyone who is reviewing inputting data. So, and the project director is the individual that's ultimately responsible for it. So with that, we're going to close the webinar this afternoon, and again, thank you for attending.